and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. And last, but certainly not least, if you're interested in extra content on querying and publishing that's only for our members, please consider joining the Literary Prospects Patreon at patreon.com/literary prospects. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Susan Coll is the author of 8 novels, including Bookish People and Real Life and Other Fictions, a USA Today bestseller. Her third novel, Acceptance, was made into a television movie starring Joan Cusack. Her latest novel, The Literati, is out now. Susan's work has appeared in publications including the New York Times Book Review, The Washington Post, Washington Magazine, Moment Magazine, NPR.org, and Atlantic.com. She's the events advisor at Politics and Prose Bookstore in Washington, D.C., and was the president of the Faulkner Foundation for 5 years. Susan Coll, thank you so much for being here to discuss your hilarious new novel, The Literati. Kirkus says The Literati is a comedy of errors that gets it just right. Booklist says, this is the perfect read for those looking for a bookish comedy of manners, and readers of Litfic looking for something lighter will enjoy the deep dive into Clemmy's consciousness. Bookpage says, Coll's witty, vivid portrayal of a young woman trying to succeed in the literary industry is sure to delight readers. Author Louis Baird says, I have learned to relish every minute I spend in Susan Coll's comic universes, and The Literati is no exception. Featuring a glittering array of characters, this satire of nonprofit dysfunction is up to the minute, intricately plotted, and wickedly funny. Above all, it's delicious. And author Abbott Kaler says, with a poet's flair for language, a comedian's knack for timing, and a satirist's gift for skewering the absurd, Susan Coll sends the reader on a riotous adventure. The Literati is a wickedly smart and funny gem of a novel that I devoured in one sitting. And I could certainly go on. There are many, many of these wonderful blurbs, but I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for reading all of that. I'm blushing. So, yeah.
How do you describe The Literati?
It's a comedy, a little bit of a screwball, madcap comedy of manners, about the literary world dysfunction, which is something I've been writing about for a while. Dysfunction is not necessarily the right word, but just the sort of a send up of the literary world, but with affection, I would say. It's the world I live in and work in and love, but also can see the humor in every single day. So,
What was the spark that got this one started for you?
well, I'd been writing about Clemmy already in an earlier book, Bookish People. She was a young bookstore employee charged with putting on author events. And she was one of 3 voices in that book. So part of the inspiration for this was I wanted to continue to see what became of Clemmy, but it's completely standalone book. You don't need to have read Bookish People. And it's set at a literary nonprofit. I happen to have been involved with a literary nonprofit, and I loved that work and I took it very seriously, but I could also see the humor in all of that. And almost every week, something would happen. The executive director would call me with the latest development or problem. And I both responsibly tried to help fix it, but also could see the comic potential. So,
Well, we'll just say you were the president of the Faulkner Foundation for 5 years.
yes.
And it is an organization seemingly very closely akin to the Washington Literary Nonprofit in the book.
Well, yes and no. I mean, more no than yes, really, because the kinds of problems that WLNP, Washington Literary Nonprofit, faces, and that name was kind of a spoof on the Washington football team, which changed its name. And for a couple of years or so, that was literally the name of the team, Washington football team. So I thought that was a funny version of a name for a scandal-plagued nonprofit. But there were no scandals going on at the Ben Faulkner Foundation, just to be clear about that. The bank accounts are solvent. There's no malfeasance that I'm aware of. Whoever won the award was meant to win the award. Only in the my understanding of how a small literary nonprofit runs are there similarities. Otherwise, just no.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. But can you talk a little bit about your experience at Penn Faulkner and what that role was like and what that was like?
Sure. I was on the board there for 6 years and I was the president for 5 years. And that my time there was probably unusual in that I was the COVID president. I came on just
Mm.
as COVID was beginning, and that meant a lot of changes and a lot of triage just to keep things going, as many other nonprofits had to do, many businesses, all of us. But for that particular world, it meant giving up our offices. It meant going completely virtual, and this gala that I write about, the big build up to in the Literati. The Clemmy comes on into this job and she only has been there a couple of days, and the executive director goes missing, and she is charged with putting on this gala event that's also their award ceremony. So that was something I was familiar with, but when I became president, we also had to cancel that big fundraising event. So because of COVID, and we had a virtual event, I believe 3 years in a row. So when we finally came back to in person, some of the antics that I write about, not a lot of them, but one of them in the book, there's a gentleman who crashes the bar, and that was based on my husband who actually went. The bar wasn't open yet, so we went behind the bar and started serving drinks, and I got called in by the caterer to to deal with the situation.
It
So
sounds like your husband and my husband should get together.
yeah. So some of it's very much inspired by a lot of what I saw, but not based on anything in particular. So
Oh, well, I have to ask about the characters. Uh, any of the characters based on any real experiences, or how do these characters come?
no, they're really not. And in all of my work, I go out of my way to not be writing about any real characters because I'm not setting out to skewer anybody or um yeah, I that's sort of the opposite of what I'm trying to do. So I don't think anybody would claim that they've been satirized in this book. The only real reference, you read the quote by Lou Byard. There is a reference to a dashing writer of historical fiction in there. So that's Lou. But other than that, they're
Flammable.
really that and my husband. I don't think there's anyone in there that is based on a real person. So.
How do your characters? come to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. They come to me in pieces and in a sense. I wish I could outline and do a better job of thinking through a book before I write, but I just kind of plunge right in, and that means a lot of time spent revising and thinking through as I go. One of the main characters in this book is the author who wins the literary prize at the
Mhm.
center of the book. Her name is Sveta, and I kept going back and changing the details about her quite a lot, to the point where when the book was published, I had to go reread to remind myself on where I'd landed on some of these
Mm.
details. So I'm always revising as I go. Where they come from, who can say? I really don't know. I mean, Clemmy, I knew where she came from quite clearly. But a lot of the other characters in here just were, a work in progress throughout a lot of the book, including the executive director. I kept sort of rethinking who
Mm.
he was. So I knew the broad strokes. There needed to be a character who was in this role or that role.
Mm.
But some of them just kind of come to me as I write. For instance, there's an intern, and I always knew that there would be an intern, but when the time came to start typing the intern, I stopped myself from going in the obvious direction that it would be a young,
Mm.
literary person, and I just all of a sudden this much older, very wealthy woman walks through the door and she's the intern. So I really don't know what I'm doing till it happens on the page a lot of the time. So, but at those moments I'll stop myself and say, what is the obvious thing to do here? And then I will try to do the opposite of that. So
That's great. What's the obvious, and then do the opposite.
yeah.
Like I need to make myself a post-it note that that's
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm trying to do throughout. It's sort of a challenge to myself because I think there's very obvious ways to write characters, and plot points. And then I do that, and then I stop myself and say, well, that was too easy. You need to, what are the alternative versions of what might have happened? Oh.
speaking of Clemmy, you said that she was very clear to you. She had been in another of your books. What is it about Clemmy, in particular, that that tugs at you, that demanded her own novel?
Yeah, I like writing young people. I don't know what that says about me, that I feel like I can more easily channel the mind of a 26-year-old than my own age group. But I think some of it is I have kids who are all young adults. I still work at a bookstore where I'm surrounded by a lot of young people, and I just love that energy, and I love thinking about that time of life and the kinds of choices that Clemmy has. And writing this was probably the easiest book I've written, and I think a lot of that is because I already knew who Clemmy was. So that's sort of a note to self that it would be helpful if I thought through what I was doing a little more before I wrote. But I already knew her backstory. I knew who her parents were. I knew what she wanted, what drew her to these literary jobs that she kind of loves and hates at the same time, that her whole backstory on her love life, the sort of repeating the mistakes of dating the same kinds of non-starter guys. And so it was just easy. It was easy to write her. Why I was drawn to her, I think it's just being drawn to that time of life, and
Yeah.
that, maybe it's nostalgia for me, or I'm not sure. When I was at that time of life, I already had children. So maybe this is my alternative version of,
Your alter ego.
right.
What draws you to writing comedy and satire, particularly?
Yeah, that's a great question because when I started off writing, I never thought that I was writing comedy. I never would have occurred to me that I'm funny. I don't think I'm funny. I think I'm just kind of quiet and boring, and I'm not funny in person. That I
You're
was,
very funny on the page.
yeah, well, that I'm funny on the page was not something I was aware of until I tried to sell my first novel, really my second novel, because the first novel I wrote, I was never able to publish. Then I went and tried a second novel, and it was, I thought, a historical novel about Karl Marx's youngest daughter, who'd had a very tragic life. And I spent a long time researching, and I thought I was writing a historical novel, but it had a contemporary thread, and I could see that that was perhaps a little lighter, but I wasn't thinking comedy. And when I went to shop it, everyone who looked at it, agents and then later publishers, said, "This is really funny. Like, let's get rid of this heavy historical material and just lean into that comic voice." So
Wow.
I was kind of shattered by that, really, because I at the time thought I wanted to write, very serious work of literary historical fiction. I didn't really see myself writing comedy, I'd say it took me a couple more books to lean into the fact that that is what I write and that's what I
Mm.
write best. And my attempts to write the, gorgeous literary fiction that I aspired to fell flat for the most part. So it's really only the last couple of books that I've just let go, and I'm even using words like screwball to describe what I write. And the more I let go, the better it feels to me writing wise. So I can't say why that is, but that's just how my brain works. The word satire I find interesting because I'm not sure that I see it as satire, and sometimes satire is a word that one is discouraged to be using as a writer because I think it makes it sound darker and possibly even meaner or
Mm.
more mean-spirited. And I'd say that's the opposite again of what I'm trying to do. So um,
Are you having fun?
I had a lot of fun with the Literati, and I'm having a lot of fun with the next book. So I am having fun. And again, that's probably a result of my letting myself write what comes naturally and not trying so hard to be doing something else, and also not worrying about what labels the world
Mm.
puts on it. I think again in my first few books, I just didn't want it to be called one thing or another. I didn't want it to have a certain kind of cover or another. I wanted it to be marketed in certain ways. I was really very focused on the kind of literariness and
Mhm.
being taken seriously. And now I'm just feel very, very fortunate to be able to write what comes naturally and what I enjoy writing and having fun with it. So,
And still taken seriously.
well, maybe not by myself.
You recently said that no matter what you do, you write yourself into complete lunacy plot-wise and then have to land all the planes. Can you talk about that and how you work through figuring out how to get those planes on the ground?
Yes, that's a very good question. And funny, that sounds exactly like something I would have said. I have no memory of where I said that, but that is accurate. Uh, Going back to that first unpublished novel that I referenced a minute ago, when I shopped that, a few publishers who looked at it, one of my rejection letters said, "How wonderful to have read a novel where there's too much going on instead of nothing going on." But ultimately, it was a pass. And again, without meaning to or kind of knowing what I'm doing, I do just start one plot point cascades into another plot point, and I can get it all to about two-thirds of the way through the novel like that. But
Mhm.
then as you're ending the book, you need to tie up all of those plot points. So it's always a challenge. That's exactly where I am right now, even this morning on the next book. I've set so many plot points up and how they're gonna all close, I'm not sure. And some of them probably just have to get cut out because there's no real way to land those particular plans. Um, so yeah, there's definitely this screwball element to my writing. And how I resolve them, some of it is just taking long walks and thinking and
Mm.
talking it through with my husband, who's very good at helping me untangle a lot of these problems. Some of it is just killing off certain plot points. But, I do believe I teach writing on occasion, and I do believe that the answer is always in the book already. And so
Mm.
often, just going back and rereading, I've planted the seeds along the way, often without completely knowing it. And the answer's almost always already in the book. So when I just get to that point where I don't know what I'm doing anymore, I go back and reread, and then I see what the answer is. Or I'll see the way I began the book is often the thing I need to come back to close the loop on it.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's great advice. I know that you don't outline, um, but do you have some sort of way of keeping track of all of the planes that are in the air to continue the metaphor?
I don't outline, and I don't keep track in a conventional way. I don't have a whiteboard or post-it notes all over. I've tried those sorts of things, and when I have taught intensive novel workshops, we always talk about that, and students will bring in examples of what they do. So I understand the various tools available. They just don't really work for me. I'm able to keep track of it in my head for the most part. I mean, sometimes probably the line editor I've worked with would disagree because she'll go through it and point out occasionally things that I've sort of little pieces that I've maybe gotten wrong in my, like years, dates, sort of time. Sometimes I don't do the best job of keeping track of, but yeah, I just have it all in my head. But I don't outline, but I do have a general sense of the book in
Mm.
mind when I begin. I know usually what my point is, why I'm writing it, what it is I want to be communicating, and a general sense of how it's going to end. Maybe not the exact scenes or the exact dialogue, but I know the general arc. And I find that there's something that's just become intuitive to me about the arc of the story. And even when I've started over on the book I'm working on right now, I got about halfway through and decided that the narrator needed to change completely. And that meant a lot of what I'd written had to just go in the trash. But when I got to the same exact spot in the writing process, I realized that was the place where it just needed the same emotional arc that I had deleted. So
Mm.
there's just something about storytelling that I think is organic to all of us. So I think there's a way in which you can kind of overthink it sometimes with trying to pre-plot and just kind of letting it unfold in the way you would tell a story at the dinner table. It's going to have its own arc, or it's not, and it's going to put everybody to sleep. And that's possibly the same that will happen with the novel. So
What is your process like from when you get that first kernel of an idea for a story, maybe the ending and the arc? What happens next? How does it go from that beginning thought in your head to a finished draft?
Yeah. Well, I usually just start writing and try to get the first couple of chapters down, and then I will show that to a few people just to make sure I am not completely, out of my mind, that there is something there or that they can understand what it is I'm trying to do. And then I'll go back and write as much as I can of the rest of the book before I show it to anyone. With the Literati, again, that book came more easily than most. So I think I wrote about 150 pages before I even looked up and showed it to anyone. Um, and then I'll show it to a couple of trusted readers either along the way or after I've finished a first draft. And I'm very fortunate right now, that my husband he's also a novelist and he's a very good editor. So I have an in-house editor who I can show it to, and then friends who are willing to read. So
Do you have a specific daily writing routine?
I do. I write in the mornings. I think some of that is just left over from when I had young children and
Mm.
they were in school, and that was my only time of day that I could write. And even though at the time I was not necessarily a morning person, I had no choice but to use the couple of hours here and there that were available to write. So, and I became very, very disciplined about that. I wasn't going to allow any repair people to come fix washing machines, or I was probably better about it at the time about turning off the phone and just not ever scheduling anything in the morning. And I still try to keep to that schedule. Even, I'm still working part-time and I try, not always successfully. This morning I was on work email far too early, but I try to just push all of that and everything else going on in my life to the afternoon. And I find that works because even though I sometimes wish that I could put more hours in each day writing, I just reach a certain point where I'm not feeling fresh and I'm really just staring at the screen. And I've found that the times in my life when I had freed up the most time to write, for instance, when my kids were all first out of the house, and I
Mm.
thought, now I have all the time in the world. I'm really going to be productive. I didn't get very much done. So I think I'm someone who needs these sort of discrete chunks of time in which to write, and then I really hyper focus. And if I have too much time, I just don't do anything at all. So
That resonates.
yeah, I mean, I make myself way too busy, but I'm more productive when I'm way too busy to a certain extent. At some point,
Yeah.
too busy is just too busy.
Yeah. But they do say if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Right, right. Yeah.
Have you always been a writer?
No, but I think I always knew I wanted to write in some sense, which may be what you're asking. I loved reading from an early age and knew that I wanted to do something with words. I reached a point after college where I would have taken any job that was writing adjacent. I didn't care what. I would have edited crossword puzzles. I even once applied for a job as a captioner before we had, AI or more technology focused or enabled transcription. Just anything along those lines would have made me happy. And I did freelance for a while, doing just freelance feature stories. I worked on a college newspaper. But I think inside, I knew I wanted to be doing something more fiction oriented. So it feels like it took me a very long time to break through and be able to do that. But now, now that I'm older, it feels like I've been doing this. I have been doing this for a very long time and getting published, but I think I still have the mentality of somebody who can't get published. So it still feels like, a big breakthrough each time that I manage to put a book together and send it out into the world. So,
This is the Literati is number six,
8.
eight. Okay, I was
Yeah.
thinking eight, and then for some reason I eight. Yeah, I think you've figured it out. No.
Well, but publishing, I just always feel like I'm scraping by. I think probably everyone does because it's a tough business and it's not something to be taken for granted. So each time I both finish a book and manage to get it published, it feels like a surprise.
What was the initial road to publication like for you?
Well, as I mentioned, this first novel I could not get published, and I wrote that pretty much just on my own. That was before I had any kind of writing community, even. I was living overseas and I had very young children, and I just went into a room a couple hours a day and typed and came up with this novel and managed to find an agent, but she told me from the start she didn't have high hopes of being able to sell it because, which I laugh thinking about this, my friends and I all joke about this, it was a bad time for fiction, because you're always hearing that. That was at least, that was about 30 years ago. There were all sorts of reasons why it wasn't going to be easy to sell. I was an American living in England trying to sell a book, and the novel was set in India. There were lots of reasons why she thought it wasn't going to be marketable. And she was right, but there's always lots of reasons. So then I said to myself, well, I'm going to take everything I learned from that experience and look at it as a glass half full because it kind of was. It at least got looked at and nice things were said, such as the rejection with too much going on instead of nothing going on. Because I take that as a compliment as well. So some
Yeah.
of it is just, your own morale to keep yourself going. And then I started working on this book about Karl Marx's daughter and told myself I would give it one more shot and I'd put everything I had into that book. And if I couldn't sell it, I'd go back to school and get my master's and teach. I've always had backup plans. I still have backup plans. So, and even selling that was a struggle, but it did finally get out into the world. But as I was saying, each book just feels like a miracle that it has found a publisher and found its way into the world because I still have that memory of how difficult it was. Um,
When you sold the first book, did you query and find an agent at that point and stick with the same agent, or what's that sort of side of
Yeah, well, my
life?
first agent, the one who had taken on the unpublished novel, then left the agency she was with and also left the country. So, and then I moved back to the US. So I had an easier time the second time out finding an agent. And but it still went through a very long process of trying to sell it and a lot of rewriting because, uh, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of editors looked at it and there was something about the voice that they liked, the comic voice, but they didn't like all of the historical material. So And I didn't want to get rid of that because that was the heart of the book. So I did a lot of rewriting of that book. And I cut it a certain amount, and then I was sent back to cut it back even further. By the time it published, I wasn't really sure what it even was anymore, but it was so different from where it had began. But I accepted that. I think if it had worked the way it was, it would have been published the way it was. I say that about my own work. I don't think that's true necessarily of other books that can't find publishers, because I think teaching for a number of years, I've had so many students with really, really good books that should have found publishers and did not. So I don't always think it's the book. I think a lot of times it's just the very challenging marketplace. But for this book, I accepted that it probably wasn't working as it was, and that it was better in the end. It became sort of rom-comish, and I had seen it as a tragic historical novel. So there were a number of really big changes, but I was grateful in the end that it found a publisher and it made its way into the world.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before publishing your first book, that first book?
I think that goes back to what we began talking about with comedy.
Mm.
I wish I had allowed myself to enjoy the process more, both of being published as a comic writer. I mean, it's not really that it's straight up comedy. It's still sort of finding the audiences that I would hope for it to find. But I wish I would have just not worried so much about the labeling and just kind of leaned into what what comes most naturally to me. And I think generally to just worry less. I still wish I could worry less, but maybe that's just part of the process. You have a book out in the world and people are reading it and they have thoughts about it and they write those thoughts on the internet, and it's hard to disengage from all of that, although I try. I'm doing a pretty good job right now. I don't think I've read any of the Goodreads reviews, so maybe a couple, but I'm just trying to do a better job of disengaging from all of that. So,
That kind of leads into another question that I had for you, which is 8 books in, how do you avoid burnout? How-
that's a good question because I've also been for the first time with my current publisher under tight deadlines.
Mm,
With the first 5 or so books, I took a long time to write those, and it took a long time to publish those. um, Mostly because I think that's the more normal cycle of publishing, to just send it in and it takes a long time for it to be read, and just there's no urgency to it all.
mhm.
Now I've been under this is now my second set of 2 book contracts with very tight deadlines. So I have been writing very quickly, and I think in some ways, I mean, there's benefits to writing quickly. I think we could all probably, as writers, be more productive
Hmm.
if the publishing cycles encourage that. So
Mhm.
I think I've probably spent as much time writing these last couple of books as I did the previous couple of books. It's just that there was a lot of time in between of walking around in existential despair. Like, is anyone ever going to return my phone call or my email? Is anyone ever going to read this? I've just now eliminated that in a healthy way. That's not really speaking to the burnout question directly. I think probably I have cycles of burnout, but I don't think they're any different than anybody else's cycles. Maybe they're just more compressed right now, because I'm on tight deadlines. And I do start to feel a little burnt out, and then I'll get to a funny part of the book and I don't usually laugh at myself. I can't really see what is funny about it often, but every once in a while I can. And this week I wrote a scene that I could see, oh, that's funny. And I just had a little laugh by myself in my office. So that keeps me going, those little moments.
You mentioned you teach writing. Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
Yeah, I think my advice is just to keep going and to both keep going and to be open to revision and to listen to the feedback that you're getting, but to keep going. I think it's very easy to give up. It's also very easy to not listen to what you're being told and then keep trying to sell the same work that is not ready to be sold. And also that, I guess my third piece of advice would be to not rush. I've
Mm.
watched students with really promising work that is not ready just be in such a hurry to get it out into the world and then kind of blow their chances when they've
Mm.
connected with an agent. For instance, one student who just a really, really promising book and then went to one of these conferences with speed dating and
Mm.
met agents who were interested, but the book was not ready. I had emphasized that the book wasn't ready, and I think just kind of not that it wouldn't eventually find its way into the world, but to just kind of lose those chances by trying to send it out. Because sometimes you have the first 50, 100 pages that are ready or even more, but then it's just not done. And these days, for the most part, you need to have a finished manuscript that works. It's not the kind of publishing world where too many editors are going to work with you to get it to that point if it's a first novel. So just to slow down, not give up, and listen to the feedback that you're getting, I would say.
I love that. It's great advice. We have a traditional last question on this podcast, and it is when the Literati is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my gosh. Oh, I wish I'd known that. I would have like given that a lot of thought.
I should prep people for this question.
That's a really important question. I've been listening to a lot of Ronan Chapel. Is that her name? Am I saying it correctly?
Chapel
Um,
Roan?
Chapel Ronan. Yeah, sorry. This is why I should have prepped. But there's an energy there and a playfulness, and I could imagine Clemmy sort of with her earbuds in, walking to the Hilton Hotel where this gala is held, and kind of I can imagine that's what she would be listening to, with apologies for getting the name backwards there.
Easily done. And I can also see that. I think that would be great. I can totally picture Clemmy listening to that.
Even though I think I do, in fact, have her walking, listening to some Taylor Swift, I think I would probably pump that up energy wise.
Yeah. 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 I feel like maybe even, yes, I see Chapel Roan more.
Yeah.
Susan Coll, thank you so, so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure getting the chance.
Thank you, Kelley, for having me. It was a lot of fun to talk to you. So.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.